Hi, Hunter Hastings here. One of the reasons we talk so much about entrepreneurship at the Value Creators is that entrepreneurship is a positive contribution to the world. Entrepreneurs are people who are motivated by making customers feel better, by solving their problems, by bringing them new solutions that they didn't know that they could have, by helping them to learn what they can want, which is better than what they expected. So entrepreneurship is a very positive undertaking, a positive contribution. But as individuals, we can suffer from negativity. We can have experiments that go wrong. We can have sales that don't meet our targets. We can have dissatisfaction come to us in feedback loops, and we can treat it as a failure as opposed to a positive piece of information. Negativity isn't helpful for entrepreneurship. We need to be positive.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Today, we're going to talk about a book called The Negativity Fast, which is about exactly that, taking negativity out of your diet and substituting positivity. It's by Anthony Iannarino, and he's our guest today. Anthony is highly qualified. He's got a law degree. He's got a business administration qualification from Harvard. He himself has been an entrepreneur, leading a business in the staffing industry. He did a lot of the sales and marketing for that business and learned a lot about what works and what doesn't. And so he started a sales consultancy, designing sales systems, trainings, ways to do better in sales, to engage customers, to bring them the positivity that is available. He's a well-known international speaker. He's an author of multiple books. He has a daily blog, which he'll tell us about. And so today's guest is going to tell us how to take a negativity fast. Anthony, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I love the idea of being a value creator. That's a wonderful thing to do.
We hope so. We hope that's important. And you are a great value creator. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You've written a book about negativity, about the dangers of negativity, about the recognition of negativity in oneself and in others, how to overcome it. And we're going to put that into context. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship, Anthony, and entrepreneurship is value creation. It's creating new economic value for others. It's often characterized in its implementation as a lot of trial and error. You run a lot of experiments under what economists call uncertainty. You don't know what the result is going to be, so it's called trial and error, although I don't like the word error myself. If you had a negative mindset, you could interpret that in a negative way, and that wouldn't be good for entrepreneurship. So that's going to be our context today, but it's not limiting. We're going to talk about everything in your wonderful book. And I thought we'd start with something that you say early in the book, which is human beings are hardwired for negativity.
Yeah.
It's about evolutionary biology. So tell us about that.
I wish that if I could go to like schools and just tell them, like, you have to explain to people that this happens to us. It's just part of what we are. What science tells us, it's hard to talk about science, post-pandemic. So these are scientific papers that I've relied on to write a lot of these things because I didn't want it to be conjecture or Anthony's opinion or anything like that. One of the things that they notice when they write papers about our negativity is something called negativity bias. And we all have it. So it just comes with you. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And the feature is, if you were a Paleolithic person and you were walking around at a time where you were trying to find something to eat, and that same thing that you were trying to eat is probably going to try to eat you at the same time, you have to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more pessimistic about your chances. And so there's a couple pieces of this that are worth just a note on. So you don't have to remember, there's not a test at the end of this. The first thing is that our negative emotions are stronger than our positive ones. And that just seems to me like that shouldn't be, it should be the other way, right? The positive one should be greater for us. There are some things that you can do about that, like being grateful for those things. But for the most points, The negative emotions are so much stronger. It is the first part of the negativity bias. So it's called a negative potency. It just needs to be more potent than our positive. The second thing they call negative gradients because they're scientists, but what they could say to make it a lot easier and a less intimidating of a term, as you get closer to a negative event, you start to get negative faster and faster over time. It doesn't do the same thing when you're anticipating something positive. So it's just, you would think that there might be balance. There isn't. It's just balanced on this side. And then if you take an event that's negative and an event that's positive, you will find that the dominance is the negative and not the positive. So this is Kahneman's research. If you lost $100 and then 15 minutes later, you found $150, you'd be more upset about the loss of the 100, even though you're up $50. And the Kahneman has done that work for a long time. And the last thing is differentiation. It's just harder for our body and our brain to figure out all these things that are negative. And so they end up taking a lot of resources for us and a lot of our focus. So you happen to have that negativity bias. There are things that you can do to lessen it, though. And one of the things that I think is important is knowing that you have that negativity bias, because nobody tells you in high school or in college that you're carrying this thing around. And now you're watching TV and you're seeing all the things that are going on in the world. And it can be really easy to fall into a negative mindset.
One of the things I thought about when reading that, Anthony, was whether there's a frequency bias too. We have more negative thoughts than positive thoughts. I don't know whether counting like that makes any sense, but that often is the case, I would think.
It's about 80,000 a day, mostly repeating the same ones over and over again.
Yeah, so we'll talk about observing that and being conscious of it. One of the major triggers you talk about is stress, and you have this wonderful expression, AC/DC. I don't know where that comes from your rock and roll days, but
it does in a way, yeah.
Yeah. But again, just to put it in our context, we kind of cheer frequent change and that kind of thing as a boost to creativity. But you're saying, hey, it's a source of stress and negativity. So
yeah, entrepreneurs are wired different than other people too. I mean, so they're risk takers. They don't look at AC/DC environment, which I'll describe in a second. They don't look at it the same way as somebody else. I mean, we know that we're going to, when you said trial and error, I mean, it's just trial, fail, succeed. I mean, that we don't ever think like, oh, that didn't work, I got to quit. No, it's like, no, we're going to figure it out. We got some feedback, right? And so we don't tend to be, as entrepreneurs, as negative because, well, I have to tell you the other side. We have an optimism bias too. And some of us who are entrepreneurs have an optimism bias that says, I am going to create the next thing or the thing that replaces this thing right now, because that's just who we are. I mean, that's what we do. And so we have a lot of that optimism because you wouldn't go start a business if you weren't optimistic about it. But most of us are very optimistic and we'll do the work and we'll take the failure because it gives us feedback. And that's the one way that you would look at this. When I talk about the AC/DC environment, I'm not talking about the rock and roll band, although I was a dead ringer for Bon Scott when I played rock and roll. And everybody asked me, every band would say, can you just come and do a set with us because you can do all the AC/DC stuff? And I could, but that's not what we're talking about. Our world right now, and probably has always been, accelerating constant disruptive change. That's what it is. And that causes stress. And a lot of smart people like Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock, has mentioned that if we don't figure out how to deal with the rate of change in our environment, then we're going to have big problems sociologically, psychologically. It's very bad for us when things change faster than we can adopt them or understand those things. And this is one of the reasons that people are negative, because there is so many things. And just while you and I are talking, a few days ago, we have a new war in the Middle East. To go with it's the bookend to our Ukraine, Russia. Like, who expected a war in Europe in 2022 or 2021 when it started? You just wouldn't think that that would happen, but it did. And so these are the kinds of things that, even though you might not think about them a lot, when you see pictures and when things are presented in front of you, it does cause you to think, what's going on out there? And that's generally the truth about the AC/DC. It's very hard to keep up with all these things that happen. And some of these things are great, and you're going to have people on both sides. I happen to think AI will probably be very helpful for us in the future. And some people think it's going to destroy the world. And I think I'm on the side of positivity for this. So far, it looks like it's going to be very helpful for us in a whole bunch of ways. But people are going to interpret them based on their experiences and their knowledge.
Yeah, so you said that negativity is a mindset. Maybe entrepreneurs have a different mindset. I like that thought, and we believe it. But another phrase you used in the book, and kind of the same meaning, is we talk ourselves into negativity. We have the internal voice. Maybe you have an internal dialogue, but the good part loses. So what's the dialogue?
Oh, for me, it's unbelievable. I have one event that always, when it happens, it starts me on that path, and that is missing a flight. That's the one that I told the story about. I probably complain to my wife, I don't know, 40, 50 times a year about trains or planes or something. And at some point, she's checked me and said, okay, you have to wait 2 hours. What are you going to do with those 2 hours? And I said, I don't know. And she said, what would you do if you had 2 free hours? And I said, I would read a book. She said, go read a book. And I said, but I don't have a book. And she said, walk into the bookstore in the airport and get yourself a book. And I said, that's a pretty good idea, because I love reading books and I got 2 free hours. So now, instead of fretting that I'm not on an airplane, I just carry a very large book with me wherever I go. So if I have a 2 or a 4 hour, I can do something that I feel is productive for me. But we talk ourselves into that. It's that voice that says to me, you're going to get home late. You're not going to get the sleep that you need. You're not going to be productive tomorrow. None of those things are true. And normally it will say something like, you should really eat a giant bag of peanut butter M&Ms. Right. And then I'll say, like, no, I don't want those, even though I want those, but I'm not going to do that at 10 o'clock in Chicago. So it will just keep talking to you, and it will keep giving you this negativity because of your bias. And you can argue with it. If you want to do some real work on whether or not your voice that only you can hear is credible, then all you have to do is write down everything that it thinks is going to happen that's bad. And then when it doesn't come true, you're going to know your inner voice is not a great futurist.
You're biased.
It really
right?
isn't. It's not good. It's mostly wrong. And in one story I told in the book, I had a friend of mine, we do a conference together called the Outbound Conference. And he called me after the conference and he said, I need to talk to you. It's really important. And it's something that's not good. And then my mind said, what is it? Like, did somebody complain about something? I mean, did something happen? And I'm asking myself all these questions for 2 hours. I'm asking, like, I'm hearing this voice going, oh, what if this happened? And what if this thing happened? And all these scenarios. And then he called me and he told me what it was. I already knew. And I was like, oh, that's nothing. But for 2 hours, I'm trying, like, what did we do that got somebody unhappy? Mostly everybody's joyful at our conference, but that's what happens to us. We go right to, if something was bad, what is it? And then your mind comes up with a whole bunch of things that aren't true.
Yeah, so let's go positive, Anthony. You say just as well as talking ourselves into negativity, we can talk ourselves out of it. Maybe in your case, your wife talks you out of it, which is good coaching on her part. We're still in science. You mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't know whether you want to go there, but the positive inner dialogue. So yeah, how do we get to that bias?
Yeah, you can absolutely talk back to that voice and drown it out. So you either have a George Costanza or a Tony Robbins in there, and you can get access to either one of those two things. If you're an entrepreneur, you are going to have problems daily, weekly, monthly. You're going to have things that don't work. You're going to have things that fail. And I think what you say when that voice says, that didn't work, this is never going to work, then you say, I'm smart enough to figure this out. It might take me some time, but I will figure out how we make this work for people so that they can get this benefit that we decided that we were going to create for people. You can have that conversation with yourself too. It's still you. It's mostly you. Some of it's your parents who wanted you to be a doctor, and then you had to go confess, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm an entrepreneur. I know you wanted me to go legitimate, but some of us aren't wired that way. We're going to do something that only we can do, and that's who we are. So I'm going to tell you, most entrepreneurs I know would say, we'll figure this out. They're not going to go like, we'll never figure this out. That will be a one-time entrepreneur with a short time. The rest of us are like, figure it out. We're smart enough. There's a lot of people that know things. We can figure it out. And you can give that side of the story. It's your side of the story to argue anyway.
Yeah, I like that thought. And just to take it one step further, you've had a lot of discussions with other people in this build-up, other entrepreneurs and your wife and so on like that. Negativity often involves other people. And I know one of the biases that I get into that's negative sometimes is you expect somebody to do something fairly or unfairly, and they don't. Or they don't do it like you want, and that becomes a negative sensation in your life, in your personal way of looking at things. So you talk about empathy, and we absolutely elevate empathy as the great entrepreneurial skill. So is empathy one of these ways out of negativity?
If you lie to yourself appropriately. So what you have to do is lie to yourself. Albert Ellis created CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and a number of other therapies. One of the things that he was really good at was getting people not to be angry. And what he did is what he called ABC. So there's an activating event, and then there's your belief of that event, and then there's the consequences or how you respond to that. And as soon as you read that and you realize it's not the activating event, it's just the belief of that event. And so if you think this person's trying to sabotage me, that's one way you could look at it. Or you could say, this person doesn't really understand what we're doing. We need to give them some more training and an understanding of how to do these things before they make a bigger mess. You can do either one of those things. So how you react to this, it's not the event, even though we think it's the event or the person, but it's neither of those things. It's what you believe about it. In that particular chapter, I do a lot of work with the Stoics, who would think when anything went wrong, the gods are testing my stoicism, and that I'm just going to sit here and suffer and not say a word about it because that's what a Stoic would do, right? If you get past this idea, now it's harder if you have teenagers because you have an activating event and then you have a teenager. So it's really hard to get to the belief part because you just want to go and have a very difficult conversation with them. If you look at the beliefs and say, what's my belief about what they did? Then you might have a better chance of not having a negativity event. And maybe you can even do better with the person. For me, with my children, I have 3 Generation Z children. So I've got a son who will be 26 in February. I've got twin daughters. I would not recommend that. They're difficult between 13 and 18, and then they come back to you. But whenever anybody got in trouble, what I would do is say, you're just going to come into my office and we're going to talk for a while. And you will know by the time we're done talking here that I could just take one large breath and I could talk for 3.5 hours without stop. And eventually the kids would just grab their keys and say, like, just take my car. I just don't want to be in this room with you anymore. Just take the car keys and I'll live without the car. And it was just me talking to them about character and how to be and who your friends are and all kinds of things like that. At some point, they started to realize that I'm old enough that I know a few things that might be helpful. And they started bringing their friends in. And they would bring their friend in and say, I want you to sit down here and I want you to talk to my dad. And I'm like, I must have done a good job with a couple of you.
That's a compliment.
So they're like, you need real advice, go to him because he's done a lot of things and not all of them were good things. So I was able to help them.
Help us a little bit more with empathy, Anthony, because you've thought deeply about it. I think the way we teach it, we tend to be a bit mechanical. We're saying you're trying to understand somebody else's needs, the customer, and then construct a solution for that. You can't feel what they feel. So we say, construct their mental model. Try and understand how their mind is working and then run your idea through their mental model. It's a bit kind of processual and mechanical. Maybe you have a different way of thinking about empathy. I suspect you do.
I wrote a chapter, and it includes my brother, who is a comedian. So I do have to give you a disclaimer when I talk about my brother, because if you go to see Jake, I am not responsible for whatever comes out of his mouth. I'm his older brother. He's been the only job he's ever had in his life is a comic since he was 17 years old. In third grade, he wrote down on a paper, they had to write down what they were going to be when they grew up, and he wrote down comedy man in third grade.
Wow.
I have no idea how he knew that, but he's been doing this ever since then. But one of the things that he taught me was that when people are driving bad, he thought that they were bad drivers, road rage. His belief about the other person was they're a terrible person, they're going to get somebody hurt. And then he saw one guy that was trying to get in front of him, and he looked at his face and he realized that this guy was in desperate need of a rest area. And he had that experience so many times of his own that he just decided to tell the guy, like, go, and get in front of me. And I thought, what caused you to recognize that this person had something going on? And he said, because I have it all the time. It happens to me all the time. And so now he's completely over the road thing, and he just will tell everybody, just go in front. It's fine. He doesn't know. He's lying to himself. He has no idea if that guy really needs to get to a bathroom or not. He has no clue. But he might as well just go ahead and pretend it because he's not angry anymore. And that's one of the things about empathy. Now, there are different types of empathy, and I listed them in the book. But there are some people who are really distressed because they're empathetic. Okay, so some of them, it really takes a toll on them because they feel this. I don't know if you've ever taken an Enneagram, but an Enneagram 4 would be like Prince or Billie Eilish or somebody else who's sort of dramatic and sort of internal. If you see somebody like that, they can get really distressed because it gets into their body when they're trying to be empathetic. So a lot of entrepreneurs wouldn't do that. But the people that do that do have problems with empathy just because it gets them. I have a younger sister that's like this. If she sees anything suffering, a cat, a dog, a human being, she's in an empathetic state that makes her feel bad right
distress.
Out of the gate.
Yeah,
she feels that. She feels that stress herself. For entrepreneurs, I do think that the way that I tend to think about things is that empathy is walking a mile in someone else's shoes, which all entrepreneurs should do, like feel what the experience is of what you're doing. And compassion is recognizing that the people are not wearing the right size shoes and then give them the shoes that are going to actually fit them and help them be successful. So I think compassion is even better because it means I have to do something to help this person. So as an entrepreneur, that's what we do. In our mind, we have this idea, people are having a problem with this. We show up and we create something out of thin air and we solve a problem for someone that allows them to be less negative because they're not suffering with the problem that they had until we came along and helped them.
Yeah, I like that thought. Compassionate entrepreneurship. You push this to a limit, I thought, when I was reading the book, Anthony, with the idea of radical acceptance, which is, I think, never ever take any offense. Accept everything everyone does. Am I interpreting that correctly?
You're close, yeah. There are some things that can get your attention, let's say that way. The radical acceptance is not for the other person. It's not for them. It's for you. It's letting go. It's setting something down and just leaving it where it is and not having to worry about it anymore. I know a whole bunch of people who think that they should be the president of the United States. Mostly anybody who wants to be that should not be allowed. That would be my first piece of advice. But they think that I would do a better job controlling all of these things and all of these things. Like, can you imagine? Remember Obama, young, vital, 2 years in, his hair's gray. You remember Bush? He had these shirts on and it looks like he was wearing his dad's shirts because his neck after 9/11. And you think, who would want that responsibility? When somebody does something and it's not right, you can just not do anything. Just radical acceptance. That person, that's who they are. You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to forget them. All you have to do is let it where it is. And I would say that's probably one of the more difficult things to do. But if you have studied with some Zen masters like I have, they're like, you can't care about anything like that. Like, you don't have time. One of my Zen masters that I worked with said, don't sit on a mat for 40 years. And I said, why are you saying that? He goes, it's a total waste of your time. Don't do it. Like, I wasted 40 years doing this. And they just let everything go. Like, they're not going to be wound up in all these other people's things. So they're like, why would you do that? You have other things that you should be doing. And so you do that. I do think it's difficult for people to do it. But I will tell you, at the age that I'm at right now, which is not young, so I'll say that much, you get to this point where you're like, I don't really want to spend my time on these kind of negative things, because I could be making a contribution somewhere else that would make me more happy and make other people happy. And I think if you keep getting wound up in something that's negative, that means it's making you negative, because that's what your focus is. And you don't want to put your focus there. Now, you're going to have problems, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. That means probably that there's something right and that something could be better. But I would say when it's people or it's events, you just don't have to do anything. When I tell people to stop watching the news, the first thing that they say to me is, what if something happens and I don't know? You'll know. Every negative person you know is going to tell you. So you don't have to worry. You'll hear. You'll see it. Whether you want to or not, it's going to show up. Anything that you can leave out, all it does is say, I get my time and my attention back for something more valuable. And for entrepreneurs, that's the game.
Yeah, and in fact, you have a great kind of transition to entrepreneurship where you say, never complain. So that's the idea of putting things aside, but do design solutions. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to design solutions for that. So that's a good pivot. That what went through my mind, Anthony, is other people's complaining is good for entrepreneurs. That's feedback. That's what we use as our raw material for creating value. So we've got to be happy that some people are complaining.
Well, that's research, right? That's research. I mean, you need a minimum viable product, and then you put it out and people say, I'm not exactly sure how to do this. And then you get the feedback, and then you start doing something different. That's one of the things. As a sales trainer, I realized that letting somebody have one full day of training and expecting them to be able to execute, remember for the rest of their life after seeing something once didn't seem like a good idea to me. What I did is I said, I'm going to build you a catalog of all of the trainings so that you can just go get what you need when you need it. And you don't have to try to remember everything, because we're going to give you assets so you can go back over it and study it and help with the behavioral changes. And that's what I did, because I thought, why would I give somebody one chance to learn something? That never makes any sense. You have to see it more than one time. And that's what entrepreneurs do. You know, we figure out, how do we make this better for people? If you get to see something once and you're supposed to remember it for the rest of your life and execute perfectly, no chance, right? Somebody has to do it different.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. I was thinking about management as well. And we have a tendency to complain if people who are managing are not doing things right. And you're saying, don't complain, figure out why they're not doing it right and help them with a checklist or a piece of training or an inventory of training. So I get that.
The hard part about management, I think, is you have to get people to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. And so you have these three variables that if any of them are gone, you end up with problems. And then we think it's the person, but it isn't the person. It's the process. It's the system. The system is what does that. So yeah, that's the thing. When you get complaints or you get people that think, well, it's this person, it's not the person, it's the system. And so you have to start there. It might be the person, but probably not. Probably they just need more help.
Yeah, in fact, I love it that you've introduced the concept of systems. We're trying to investigate that kind of systems thinking. And one of the realizations, you talked about three variables, but actually you've got billions of people interacting with other billions of people in trillions of different ways, and there's no telling what can be the outcome of that. So if you think of that as the system, not negatively, it just is, then you can isolate your part of it and try and figure out how to make it better in your locality. You can't fix the global system.
No. No one so far has been able to do anything like that. It's very, very difficult when you have a little over 8 billion of us all taking individual actions.
It's a good realization, though, I think, as you said, it's the system. But let's get to another piece of positive thinking. You use the word gratitude a lot. Gratitude's a big, strong weight on the positive side of things. And you used an interesting word in conjunction with it, Anthony, which is practice gratitude, like it's a deliberate action. So tell us about that.
When you start studying gratitude, now I've known about gratitude for a long time. I read Marty Seligman's books. He's the father of positive psychology. And before that, it was either go get a psychoanalyst or get a pharmaceutical. That's what they did. But he believed that we could flourish. We can not have to have those negative things to be able to be positive. And so that's what he spent his time doing. One of the things when you start studying this, though, is the claims. I have documented all the claims that I've made in this book because I don't want people to think that these things aren't true. And as soon as you see gratitude, you got to be a little bit skeptical. Like, it is magical. Like, it's everything reduces your high blood pressure, improves your immune system, gets rid of depression, gets rid of anxiety, has better relationships with the people in your life. Like, the list is so long. You're like, what is this? Like, it's so many claims. And then you start going and looking at the scientific papers, and it's all documented. So one of the things that if anybody that's listening to this would want to do something about being gratitude, and maybe it's actually takes care of inflammation and heart disease and a whole bunch of other things. When you read it, you're like, no, that's too many things. Like, if you told me 3, fine. But now we're at like 17. That's a lot of things for gratitude to do. What Seligman had people do, he ended up on the cover of Time magazine, and he was working with an entrepreneur, and they built a website, and they had millions of people go to this website and do this exercise. It's called the 3 blessings. And what you do at the end of the day is you write down 3 things that went well for you and why they went well for you. And if you do that for 2 weeks, if you are anxious or stressed or you're depressed, that will go away. And what Seligman said after looking at all the research, it's more powerful than psychoanalysts, and it's more powerful than pharmaceutical. These are simple things. These are not being taught in college or high school or places where you could learn this earlier in your life, where it would be very helpful for your mindset. And if you were to do something like this they don't even know how long it lasts. It lasts for way longer than people think it does. The first thing was like 6 weeks, but some just kept going. These are simple things that you can do. I like this exercise for one reason, because if I use my gratitude journal, I'm going to say I love my wife. I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful for my kids. And then you're going to run out of things. Like, you're going to just keep going through those same entries over and over again. But when you have to decide, like, what happened today that was good, now you're starting to get a whole bunch of variety. And then when you start looking back over all those entries, you start to say, man, a lot of good thing happens to me. A lot of good things happen to me a lot of the time. And that starts to change people. So I think this is one of the more easy things that you can do. Radical acceptance is a little harder. Gratitude is a lot easier, and it's more powerful.
Yeah.
So that's one that I think everybody should be doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I also noted that at a more macro scale, you talk about emotional health and metabolic health as highly contributive towards getting out of negative state. So taking care of your mind with mindfulness or Zen or other things that you talk about, and taking care of your body with good metabolism. I'm very taken by Peter Attia's new book. It's called Outlive, but he talks about Medicine 3.0, which includes those kinds of things. It's not all pharmaceuticals. It's more that we can take care of ourselves. So take us up to that level, the emotional and metabolic health that we can induce.
I started, I think, in this book with the biology and just not taking care of yourself. People don't know. Peter Attia, I think I got this from, just so you know, I think this is from him. Your killer cells only show up when you sleep 7 to 8 hours. I know entrepreneurs that sleep 4 hours. Their killer cells will never become activated while they're doing that. They need 7 hours of sleep, even if they don't think so. They also need hydration. We're mostly water, and most of us walk around dehydrated most of the time. And that will absolutely help you be more negative if you are dehydrated. That will do that for you. And when you start looking at what's going on up here, the psychology, and you are still in the AC/DC, and look, to be fair about being an entrepreneur, and I am one and I have been for a long time, one thing I can tell you, that it does come with stress and anxiety. You're trying to solve a lot of things, and you have a lot of people that are, helping you, and you're paying people, and people are trying to do these things. So I think some of that is important too, is the psychology of this. I believe that you will find a way if you continue to pursue whatever you want, but you can get the negativity when things aren't going the way that you need it to. I helped a group of entrepreneurs. They had this nanoparticle that we were working on, and they helped me lose $1 million. So that was an interesting experience.
Learning. It's called learning, Anthony.
That is a very expensive education I got. They were too young, and they were not buttoned up enough to be part of what we had, and they ended up blowing up something that should not have blown up. It should have been something that you would probably see everywhere right now, except for this. And it was up here. It wasn't that they weren't smart. Emotionally, they didn't have it as an entrepreneur. They just didn't have the emotions that an entrepreneur needs to be able to be successful. And some of that is, how you treat other people and how you go into these sort of things. So I'm sure you know all of those, how all those things happen.
I ran a seed stage venture capital fund for a while, and we learned in the end that it's not the business plan, it's the people. It's assessing the founders and who they hire and whether they have it, as you say. That's much more than the business plan. So you had a nice economic summing up at the end, Anthony, which is, it's a choice. We can choose to be negative. We can choose to be positive. You can't avoid negativity entirely, but you can make the choice about your daily approach to it, your life approach to it. So just give us that reassurance. We can choose.
You can choose. It's not always easy. I think the negativity fast, like getting rid of as much of the sources, not always people, but the news, what you're consuming, the people you're spending time with. I think all of those things are factors in this. But what I would say about this is that there are times where you should be negative. And so at the beginning of this book, I have a disclaimer. I'm going to reserve my right to be negative when I have a negative event. I'm allowed to have that. Even if I'm on the fast, I'm allowed to have that. And I want people to know sometimes the right response is negativity. Not everything is going to be wonderful for us. You should try to be erring on the side of being more positive than negative more of the time. And that would help you feel better, and it would help other people feel better if you were modeling that for them, because that's something that's really important for us. And we can look at the positive and have that optimism bias that comes with us too. And that optimism bias is better, even if it's wrong. I mean, it's better to still, what I would call, be positive, future-oriented, optimistic.
Does anything in your research tell you that is linked to performance? I mean, the opposite has been claimed, that entrepreneurs have excessive confidence, and that gets them into places that they shouldn't be sometimes. So does being positive and optimistic link to good performance?
Not always. I think what you said a few minutes ago, You have to assess that individual and see if that's true for that individual. There are a lot of people that I know that want to be an entrepreneur, and I don't see it in them. I don't see them as risk takers. I don't see them as being optimistic. But look, if you're going into it and you're not optimistic, you wouldn't go into it. So this is one of the things that defines those of us who are on our own and entrepreneurial. I think it's individual, and a lot of it is how you grew up, what your experiences are. And if you had experiences like a loss.
But we can still make the choice today, though, right, Anthony? Even though we can't outlive the things that you were born with and so on, you can still make the choice today.
You sure can. And you don't have to have what other people have. I mean, you can, I would suggest you do it, make the decision yourself. When I started doing some of this work, I looked at our lifespan, which is declining. And it's declining because of fentanyl and suicide mostly. Drugs sometimes outside of fentanyl. It's 4,108 weeks. That's the average life right now. Now, we should all do better than that because we're not on fentanyl and something like that. We're not taking drugs. But you only have 4,108 weeks on average. I think we'll all do better. I think AI will help us do better. But I think if you recognize the shortness of life, you won't want to waste it. And you won't want to spend a whole bunch of time being in negative states when you could be productive doing something else. But when you have a negative state, you deal with it and you move forward and you try to get back to optimistic and positive as soon as you can. These things that happen in our lives, they can cause trauma and you can recover from those traumas. So, but you have to do the work.
Yep. So let's just end there, Anthony, with the practical advice. So the book's called The Negativity Fast. My mental model for that was thinking about diet and pulling out all of the bad things that I eat, which I know are bad for me, but I still do it. That was a really helpful model to have a fast from that. Give us what do I do now? I'm going to leave this interview. I'm inspired. I'm going to stop being negative. Tell me what to do.
Okay. The first thing that I would recommend, if you watch Fox News or MSNBC, those are two very, very, let's call it a new model. They're not reporting the news. They're trying to agitate you and try to cause you to be fearful and believe that your neighbor is your
enemy,
your foe. Yeah. Like why are they your foe? Because they have a different opinion than you on something like this? Like, why would you ever do that? But that's what they do. Is now we've got two warring tribes. I don't think this is healthy in any way. And I think that that's the first thing that I would get rid of, because for a lot of people, that's it. I mean, that's the one that really gets them. And then just the general news is all bad. I mean, you never hear that we had in Columbus, Ohio, 400 babies this month. Nobody says anything about, great, we have babies. We don't have a lot of babies. I don't know if you know that.
It's reducing.
We're about 21% under replacement rate right now. And we have 78 baby boomers who are going to be out of the workforce by 2030. And we have no generation that's big enough to pay for them. This is the first time this has happened to us in the United States, but it's also happening in Germany and France and Italy, not so much in China. They have almost no babies. They're the oldest people on earth. There's never been a generation older than theirs. They have no replacement. It's a very strange time. I think that if you watch the news and you spend a lot of time on that, probably isn't going to be helpful. I would recommend something like The Economist, where it's the Brits, right? And they're not going to be so divisive. And that I can read because I want to know, but I also don't need the divisiveness. I haven't watched any television news for over 20 years. And I posted that on LinkedIn, and I had about a half a dozen people starting putting their numbers up. 17 years since I've watched news, and I'm way happier. There's better things that you can do. If you have a lot of people who are negative in your life, I do think you have to do something about them. It's very hard to get them to change until they have a reason to. But I think you can't spend a lot of time, especially as an entrepreneur, with negative people. I mean, it just doesn't work. We're trying to do something. You're either going to be helpful for us or you're going to be a drag on us. And I think that you have to surround yourself with the kind of people who understand how this thing works, entrepreneurship. And the more that they understand it, the better.
Yeah. Is there a mind hack for that bad event, the A and the ABC? So something happens I'm disappointed with, I yell shit or whatever is permissible at that moment. So I know something negative has happened. Is there a mind hack to go straight from that to let's reframe this?
Yeah. We just got a piece of information we didn't know. We were not prepared for it. We need to go figure out how to do it. There's nothing better. As I looked at complaining, there's nothing better than just go find the solution. That is the one thing that science says about this. Go find the solution. That's the best thing you can do. And when you have the negative talk, same thing. Don't sit there and talk yourself into a negative state. Go figure it out. And Ethan Kross, who wrote a book called Chatter, that was his first thing. Don't sit there and think being an introspective is going to do this for you. It won't. Go find an answer. And entrepreneurs, that's what we do.
Good. Well, let's leave it there as a motto. I picked that out of your book, actually, where you said, go find the solution. That science says that's the right thing to do, to be positive.
Now every entrepreneur knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you know. Just go find the solution.
Go find the solution. That's what we do. Good. So the book is called The Negativity Fast. We'll link to it on Amazon, and it's by Anthony Iannarino, and we'll spell that out so you know how to spell it as well as to say it. And is there anywhere else you'd like people to find you, Anthony?
If anybody wants to reach out to me, LinkedIn is a good place. And then I have a blog. I've written a blog post every day. At the end of this year, it'll be 14 years that I've written 1,000 words at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's thesalesblog.com. And I have a whole bunch of resources for anybody who cares about sales and leadership.
Good. Okay. We'll link to that and send people there. So, Anthony, thank you so much. I'm coming out of this positively. I've got that image of the negativity fast. I'm going to pick those things off my plate and get rid of them and be all positive.
I have a feeling you're positive anyway.
Well, yes, but not always. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? That negativity is natural. What I like about what you're saying is, A, it's a choice, and B, we're all going to have those episodes. It's dealing with them that is the positive part, and go find the solution. I'm going to pin that on my wall.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anthony. This is wonderful.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.